How to make your novel irresistible to everyone. How to write a literary classic, a book that is going to be read hundreds of years from now. How? We're going to be answering that question and more, and we're starting right now. What makes a novel a literary classic? What makes a novel stand the test of time? How is it that there are some novels that are written and you read them, but in the course of time you forget about them? But some books stand the test of time, where 200 or 300 years from now, people will read your book, just like how we, the people of today, read books that were written 200 or 300 years ago. What is that secret? It all comes down to one thing. It's about making the reader connect with the protagonist in their mind, as if they're seeing through their eyes, as if the reader is pulled into the novel, as though they have become the protagonist themselves. You want the reader to understand the thought process of the protagonist. Why do they do what they do? It all comes down to one thing: asking the question, why? When you read a newspaper, you're just given the facts. You're told information, but you're not able to understand why. We like reading novels because it puts us into the mind of the protagonist. We can feel what they feel. We understand their motivations. You may not agree with a character's motivations, but at least you understand them. And this is at the heart of all great novels. It's understanding a character's motivation. Why are they doing what they do? Why do they believe they're right? One of the biggest things that amateur writers feel is that they have to make their protagonist lovable, when in fact you can make your protagonist a bad person, a selfish person. Margaret Mitchell did this with Gone with the Wind. Scarlett O'Hara is not a likable person. The vast majority of people who read Gone with the Wind, they like everybody in the novel, but they do not like Scarlett O'Hara. They find her selfish. They find her, she only cares about herself. But yet, it's one of the most read books in history. People love reading it to this day. More than 100 years later, we're still reading Gone with the Wind. But why? Scarlett O'Hara is not a nice person. It's over 1,000 pages. Why would we want to read a book that's over 1,000 pages for a character we don't care about? The fact is, it's because we're given insight into her mind. We're given an insight into how she thinks and feels, and her motivations on why she does what she does. Her goal is not to rule the world. It's just simply to win the heart of Ashley. That is a very straightforward goal, but we understand her goal. As a writer, you want to give your protagonist a goal, an objective. You want to create some form of obstacle of why they cannot reach that goal right away. But it's not just about creating a goal. We want to understand why they have that goal. Because every time we read about something, we ask the question, why? And as a writer, if you don't pull the reader into the mind of the protagonist, we don't feel that connection. We don't feel as though we're looking through their eyes. We feel as though there is a gap between the reader and the main character. And that is what will stop your novel from being successful. If there is any type of a gap between the two, the person reading will eventually close and put down the book. But if you can pull the reader into the mind where there is no gap, where you, the reader, and the protagonist become one, you're going to want to read on to figure out how this problem is going to be achieved. How are they going to fix this problem in their life? It's almost like you're writing from a first-person point of view, but you don't necessarily have to write first person. You can write third person and still make the reader feel as though they're inside the mind, looking out through the eyes of the main protagonist. We want to feel what they feel, think what they think, understand their motivations. Because when a character does something that is different than what they're thinking, we can understand why there is a difference. If they're lying, we can understand why they are lying. We may not agree with them, we may not like them, but at least we understand why they feel compelled to lie, why they do bad things. By being inside the mind of your character, as a writer, you want to pull the reader into the character and let us know what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their objective is. So when they go out and they do something, we can understand if what they're doing matches up with what they want, or if what they're doing is opposite of what they want. That way we can understand why. All stories are about characters on a journey. They have to get from point A to point B in order for them to achieve their goal. By giving us insight into a character's mind, we are on that journey. We are going along with them. We're not just reading about someone who is doing something. We are now inside their mind, understanding why they are doing what they do. So if they are successful or not, at least we can understand their goal. When we read a novel, we're not just reading about what people do. If that's all we want, we can read a newspaper. But people read a novel because they want insight into the human condition. They want to understand themselves. And by understanding what other people do in a novel, it helps us understand ourselves. It helps us understand the human condition. We're not just reading about someone going from point A to point B, but we're pulled into the complex mind that is like a universe unto itself. We can understand someone else's thought pattern. It pulls us out of our daily, regular life, and we're now pulled into someone's life who is on a journey. There's something exciting about reading about someone who is on a journey, because we don't feel that in our own lives. We like to read to escape from our own lives. But we don't want to just be told what a character is doing. We want to feel what they feel and think what they think and understand their motives and their actions, making us feel as though the story we're reading is alive. All novels are about one thing: wanting to understand the meaning of life. And we can try to understand the meaning of life by living our own lives, but that can only give us a certain amount of information. But when we read about someone else's life, we can learn a lot more about life by seeing through somebody else's eyes. It gives us a chance to live more than one life. The more books you read, it feels like the more lives you have led. And in the process of living someone else's life, you acquire knowledge on answering the question, why are we here? When you read a whole bunch of books, you might just find that answer. And that is, in fact, what drives people to read a book. One of the things you will notice about Stephen King novels is he doesn't write about monsters. He's known for writing about monsters, but in fact, what makes Stephen King successful is the fact that he writes about people in dangerous situations. He doesn't write about the monster. He writes about the individual dealing with the monster. A great example of this is in his short story called The Mist, in which a father and a son go to a grocery store in which this white mist covers the land, and you can't go outside because anyone who does go outside gets killed by some mysterious creature. What is the creature? We don't know. Now, your average amateur writer would focus all of their attention on describing the creatures, describing the shopping mall. But Stephen King doesn't focus on the store. He doesn't focus on the mist or the creatures inside. He focuses on the father trying to protect his son from whatever it is that's out there. He puts us into the mind of the lead character. We feel what he feels. We're thinking what he thinks. We feel as though we are the ones who are inside that grocery store. We feel as though we're the ones trapped. We're not reading about someone trapped in a grocery store. We're reading about ourselves trapped in that store. We feel as though we have been pulled into the novel. We are seeing through the characters' eyes and understanding their objectives because we're given insight into the mind and their emotions, which makes for a powerful, powerful story. Charles Dickens did not just write about England. He wrote about the people living in England. He didn't just tell us about how difficult it was for poor people back in long ago in England. Newspapers could do that. But what made Charles Dickens successful is that he wrote about families, children, and people, what they were thinking and feeling while living in poverty in London, England. By creating that intimacy where we're allowed inside the mind, in the emotions of characters, we can then understand how they're living and being affected by the poverty in England. But if you just read about it in a newspaper, you're told facts and numbers and figures. But Charles Dickens pulled us into the mind, and we understood the character's thoughts and emotions. Like in Ebenezer Scrooge, we understood what he was thinking and feeling, because Charles Dickens allowed us to feel as though we're living inside his mind. As exciting as it is, not too many people watch the NASA channel where they show cameras in outer space, where you're actually seeing the Earth, not from some Hollywood movie, but actual real footage of Earth from outer space. But the problem is that you don't have tens of millions of people watching the NASA channel looking at Earth or the different planets from outer space. Why? Because we're not connected to anybody. Yes, the footage might look nice, but there is no connection. When you write a story about a person in outer space and we're allowed insight into their mind, their goals, their objectives, their thoughts, now we have a reason to be invested. Now we want to turn the page because we're not just looking at something from a distance, but we're now looking at something through the eyes of a character in that situation, making it more real and more personal, making us want to know what's going to happen next. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link in the description down below, where you can visit my site where I have a ton of information that you can watch that will help you become the greatest writer you can be, because that is what I want. I want to help you become a great writer. What is the golden rule that you have to obey when writing a novel to make a great novel? Well, I want you to watch my next video, and I'll answer that question for you. In fact, I'm going to leave a link for that video right here that you can watch that video right now, and it will help you become a great writer.